John stared at the folded piece of paper in his hand, feeling its edges dig into his palm as if it were a weapon. His breathing had turned shallow, and he struggled to keep his composure. It had been less than 5 minutes since the nurse handed it to him, but those words felt like a dagger to his chest. He had come here for a reason. A cold, calculated reason. He was here to finalize his plan, to take his mistress, Sarah, into the hospital to see his wife one last time. To tie up loose ends and move on with his life. After all, what was the point of waiting any longer? His wife, Lisa, had been bedridden for months, and the doctors said there was no hope for her. He had made his decision. But nothing could have prepared him for the words on this note. "She doesn't have much time left," the nurse had said when she handed it to him. He'd nodded, not thinking much of it. He knew Lisa's condition was critical. But that wasn't the part of the message that rattled him. No. It was the last line. The one that twisted his insides and sent a chill down his spine. "Your wife knows everything. She's been waiting for you." He stood in the quiet hospital hallway, his mind racing, unable to process what he had just read. His thoughts were a chaotic mess of guilt, fear, and confusion. He had always been able to compartmentalize his life, his wife, his mistress, his career, each part neatly tucked away in its own box. But now? Now, those boxes were falling apart. Lisa, his wife, had been sick for so long. Months of endless tests, treatments, and doctor's appointments. She had been the love of his life once, but over time, the romance had faded. It was hard to remember a time when they had been happy, when they were a young couple filled with dreams and hopes for the future. Now, those dreams seemed far away, distant, like echoes from another life. But Sarah? Sarah was different. Sarah was everything Lisa had stopped being. She was young, vibrant, full of life and energy. She understood him in a way Lisa never could anymore. She made him feel alive again. He felt Sarah's presence beside him. She had been waiting patiently, her hand on his arm, looking up at him with concern. He hadn't told her everything, hadn't explained the true reason they were here today. He hadn't wanted to, she wouldn't understand. She thought he was just finalizing the divorce. She didn't know the deeper truths, the lies he'd told, the choices he'd made. "You okay?" Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. She was looking at him now, her face full of worry. She didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. John swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He forced a smile. "Yeah, just a little shaken up. You know how it is." Sarah didn't seem convinced, but she nodded, squeezing his arm. "Well, we should go in and talk to her, right? It's the last time you'll see her, John. Let's not wait any longer." Her words were meant to reassure him. But they only heightened the storm inside him. He had told himself this moment would come, that today would be the day he finally let go of his past and walked into a future with Sarah. But now he wasn't so sure. He unfolded the note again, reading the last line over and over. "She's been waiting for you." How could she possibly know? How long had she known? What had she been waiting for? His heart thudded in his chest as he looked down the hallway toward the door that led to Lisa's room. The familiar white walls, the sterile smell of disinfectant, and the quiet hum of machines made him feel like a stranger in a place he should have felt at home. He took a step forward, and then another, his legs suddenly heavy, as if the weight of his decisions was pressing down on him all at once. He couldn't explain why, but something about the nurse's words had made him second-guess everything. Something about the way she had spoken, the way she had looked at him, made him feel like he was no longer in control. As they reached the door, John stopped. He glanced at Sarah, who was still beside him, looking up at him with a mixture of hope and impatience. She wanted him to open the door, wanted him to step inside and take control of the situation, to end it once and for all. But now, with the nurse's cryptic message echoing in his head, he wasn't so sure. Was this the right thing to do? Was he really ready to walk away from everything? John placed his hand on the door handle, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. He could hear the faint sound of Lisa's breathing from the other side of the door. He knew she was dying, knew this was the end. But somehow, now, the finality of it all felt different. It felt like there was more to the story than he had been willing to admit. He pushed the door open, and the room came into view. Lisa was lying in the hospital bed, her face pale and drawn, her body frail beneath the white sheets. The monitors beeped softly in the background, and the only other sound was the slow, rhythmic pulse of her breath. She didn't move when they entered, didn't stir at the sound of their footsteps. John's heart twisted in his chest as he stepped into the room. He hadn't seen her like this in weeks. She had always been strong, resilient, a woman who could handle anything life threw at her. But now she looked so small, so fragile. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. Sarah stepped in behind him, looking uncomfortable, as if she didn't quite know how to be in this space. She had never met Lisa, and John had kept her away from his wife for a reason. He didn't want Sarah to see the woman he was leaving behind. John turned to Sarah, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "I'll talk to her for a minute," he said, his voice low. "Why don't you wait outside?" Sarah didn't protest. She nodded and stepped back, glancing at Lisa with a mixture of pity and curiosity before leaving the room. John slowly walked toward the side of Lisa's bed, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at her, taking in the woman he had once loved, the woman who had been his everything. How had it come to this? How had they drifted so far apart? And then, just as he was about to speak, Lisa's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but then it sharpened, locking onto him. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, John thought she might speak, might say something he could use as a final goodbye. But instead, her eyes seemed to search him, as though she were trying to find something, some piece of him that was still there. "You've come," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. "I've been waiting for you." John froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. She had known. She had known all along. His hands clenched at his sides, his heart pounding in his chest. The note, the nurse's words, they were all starting to make sense now. She had been waiting. She had been waiting for this moment. For him to come to her, to confront the truth. But the truth of what? What had she known? What had she been waiting for? Before he could speak, Lisa's frail hand lifted, reaching for him. Her fingers brushed his, and for the first time in months, John felt something stir inside him. It was not guilt, not regret, it was something deeper. Something more complex. And as her hand lingered in his, a flood of emotions washed over him. He wasn't just holding her hand. He was holding on to the last piece of a life he was about to leave behind. He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean? What have you been waiting for?" Lisa's eyes locked onto his, and with a faint smile, she whispered the words that would change everything. "I've been waiting for you to face your choices, John. I've been waiting for you to come home." John's heart skipped a beat when Lisa spoke. The words she whispered, so soft, so fragile, carried a weight that he had never anticipated. "I've been waiting for you to face your choices, John. I've been waiting for you to come home." He stared at her in silence, his breath catching in his throat. What did she mean? How could she possibly know what was really going on? She'd been bedridden for months, her body too weak to even lift a finger. How could she have known anything about his plans, his betrayal, or the future he was planning with Sarah? Lisa's pale eyes seemed to pierce through him, her gaze unwavering. For a moment, he felt as if time had stopped, like the world around him had faded away, leaving just the two of them in a suspended moment of truth. Lisa, how could you know? His voice cracked, and he cursed himself internally for sounding so weak. He wasn't supposed to be weak. He wasn't supposed to be the one questioning everything. Lisa's frail lips twitched into the faintest of smiles, but it wasn't a smile of comfort. It wasn't one of love or understanding. It was a smile that held a kind of quiet resignation, as if she had known this day would come, but she hadn't wanted it to. "I've known for a long time, John," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if it took every ounce of her energy to speak. "I've seen the signs. I've heard the whispers. And I've been waiting for you to face what you've done." John's stomach twisted. He had been so careful, so meticulous about hiding the truth from Lisa. How could she have known? He had arranged everything so perfectly, kept his affair with Sarah under wraps, made sure his visits to Lisa's hospital room never coincided with Sarah's, and even told Sarah the story that Lisa's condition was only getting worse, that it was time to make a clean break. But now, standing here, in this sterile hospital room, Lisa's words shattered the illusion. She knew. She had known everything. You knew about Sarah?" John's voice was low, almost a whisper himself, as if he feared saying her name aloud would make it all too real. Lisa didn't answer immediately. Her chest rose and fell slowly, labored, but steady. The monitors beeped quietly in the background, reminding him of the fragility of her existence. She seemed to take a long time to respond, as if savoring this final conversation, this one last chance to make her husband understand the full extent of her knowledge. "I knew about Sarah," she said finally. "I knew from the moment you first started spending more time away from me, from the moment I saw that distance in your eyes." Her voice was steady now, her words tinged with a quiet strength. "But that wasn't what hurt, John. What hurt was knowing you weren't willing to face me. You weren't willing to come back to me, even though you promised." John's chest tightened as guilt and shame flooded his senses. The woman in front of him, the one he had promised to love and protect for the rest of his life, was lying in front of him, dying, knowing everything, and still, she was trying to make him understand. "Lisa, he didn't know what to say. He was caught off guard, overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. Part of him wanted to scream, to shout at her for making him feel this way. But another part of him, the part he had buried deep inside, wanted to break down and beg for forgiveness. "I never wanted this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted you to find out this way." Lisa smiled again, but this time, it was more knowing than bitter. "I knew it would come to this, John. I just didn't know how. But you had to make a choice. And you did." She paused for a moment, as if collecting her strength, before speaking again. "But I want you to understand something, John. It wasn't just about Sarah. It was about you running away from everything. Your promises, your vows, me, and even yourself." John felt his throat tighten as her words hit him like a sledgehammer. She was right. He had been running. Running from the life he had built with her, from the responsibilities that had once seemed so important. Running toward something that was just as fleeting as his dreams had been in the beginning. "I've known for months, John," Lisa continued, her voice softening. "When you first started staying late at the office, when you started going on business trips, I knew. And when I saw the way you looked at her, the way you smiled, I knew then too. But I let it happen. Because I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to keep you from walking away." John swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. He had been so selfish, so blind to what had been right in front of him all along. The love he had taken for granted, the wife who had stayed by his side through everything, even when he had given up on her. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Lisa. I never wanted to hurt you." Lisa's eyes softened, and she reached out her hand, trembling, but still holding on to life with a quiet determination. "I know you didn't. But John, you need to know this. She paused, as if gathering her last reserves of strength. I'm not angry with you. I'm just tired. Tired of watching you make the same mistakes. Tired of being the one to forgive, to let it go. John's heart broke as he grasped her hand. I've failed you, Lisa. I don't know how to fix this. Lisa's breath hitched, and her grip tightened just enough for him to feel it. Her voice grew weaker with every word, but there was still a fire in it. You can't fix it, John. You can only face it. And you have to decide who you want to be now. Do you want to keep running, or do you want to stand up and face the truth? Because running away from it all has only hurt you more. He was silent for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. How could he answer her when he didn't even know the truth himself? The truth was, he didn't know who he wanted to be anymore. All he knew was that he was standing here, caught between a past he couldn't escape and a future that was slipping further and further out of reach. I'll always love you, John, Lisa said softly, as if reading his thoughts. But I need you to know that love isn't enough to fix what's broken. Sometimes, letting go is the hardest thing we can do. The finality of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The silence in the room felt like it stretched on forever. Before John could respond, Lisa's eyelids fluttered shut, her breathing shallow but steady. She had spoken her piece, and now, all that was left was the quiet inevitability of what was to come. John sat there for what felt like an eternity, his hand still holding hers, not knowing what to do next. There was so much left unsaid, so much left to figure out, but for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his choices. And just as he was beginning to process everything, the door to the hospital room creaked open behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He could feel her presence, the heat of Sarah's gaze as she stepped into the room. I don't want to interrupt, Sarah's voice was soft, hesitant, as she looked at Lisa in the bed. But, are we ready to go? John slowly turned, his heart still in turmoil, and faced the woman who had been waiting for him, the woman who had promised him a future he wasn't sure he deserved anymore. And just like that, the choice had been made. The room felt heavier the moment Sarah stepped inside, the air thick with tension. John didn't know how to process what had just happened, what Lisa had said. He didn't know what he had been expecting, but it wasn't this. It wasn't this raw, unfiltered truth, so painfully and brutally exposed. Lisa's fragile words still echoed in his mind. I've been waiting for you to face your choices, John. I've been waiting for you to come home. But now, standing in front of Sarah, he realized that the choices he had been avoiding for months were crashing into him with a force he couldn't ignore. There was no escaping this. There was no running away from the truth. Sarah stood by the door, her presence a stark contrast to the quiet stillness of the room. She looked at Lisa for a moment, her gaze lingering on the woman who had been, until today, the center of John's world. Then, her eyes flicked back to John, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. I didn't mean to interrupt, Sarah said quietly, as though unsure of how to navigate the delicate situation. She seemed so out of place here, in this sterile room filled with the weight of history and heartache. John barely heard her. His mind was still reeling from Lisa's words, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. The guilt, the shame, the anger. Everything swirled inside him like a storm, and he wasn't sure how to calm it, how to find clarity amidst the chaos. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the bed, at Lisa, her pale face almost ghostly under the dim light of the hospital room. It felt like a lifetime ago that they had stood side by side, young and full of dreams. But those dreams had faded, suffocated by lies, by betrayal, and by his inability to face the truth. John. Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts, and he finally turned to face her. Her eyes searched his face, trying to read him, trying to understand what was happening. Yeah, he muttered, shaking his head as though trying to clear the fog in his mind. Yeah, I don't know what to do right now. Sarah took a cautious step toward him, her eyes filled with empathy, but also uncertainty. She didn't understand. How could she? To her, this was just a moment, a quick stop in a series of steps toward a new life together. But to him, this was everything. This was his past crashing into his present, and he was standing at the crossroads of a future he didn't know if he deserved. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. John looked at her, the woman he had been so sure about, the one he thought he could build a life with. He saw the hope in her eyes, the same hope that had once lived in his eyes when he looked at Lisa. But now, all of that felt so fragile, so fleeting. Was it possible to rebuild something after everything had fallen apart? Was it even worth trying? "I don't know, Sarah," he said, his voice hollow. "I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew what I wanted, but now, I don't know. I don't know anything anymore." Sarah's face softened, but she didn't press him. Instead, she just stood there, waiting for him to find his way back to himself. She had always been patient, always willing to give him the space he needed, but today was different. Today, things were no longer simple. Lisa's breathing remained slow and steady, the rhythmic sound of the machines a constant reminder of the fragility of life. John turned back to look at her, his heart aching. What had she known? How much had she known? Had she known all along that he was slipping away from her? Or was it something she had just accepted, resigned to the fact that their love was no longer enough to hold him? "John," Sarah spoke again, her voice more urgent this time. "What's going on? You're not saying anything. We came here for a reason. We need to talk to her, to make this final." John's jaw clenched at the words. Final. The word seemed to hang in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating him. It felt too soon. Too abrupt. Could he really do this? Could he really walk away from everything, from the life he had shared with Lisa, from the love they once had, just because he had found someone else who made him feel alive again? "I don't know if I can do this," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I can just walk out of this room and leave her here to die. Not after everything." Sarah's eyes widened, but she quickly regained her composure, stepping forward and gently taking his hand. "John, you don't have to do anything right now. We don't have to rush. We can figure this out together." But John pulled his hand away, suddenly feeling suffocated by her words. No. This wasn't something they could figure out together. This was something he had to face on his own. "This is about more than just me and you, Sarah. It's about her. It's about what I've done to her. And I don't know if I can live with that." His voice was barely audible as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. There was a long silence between them, and for the first time, Sarah seemed unsure of how to respond. John could see the fear in her eyes, the fear that this moment would tear them apart, that all of the promises they had made to each other would crumble under the weight of his indecision. "Do you still love her?" Sarah finally asked, her voice small but steady. "Do you still love your wife?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Of course, he still loved her. He always would. She had been his everything, his partner in every sense of the word. But somewhere along the way, that love had morphed into something unrecognizable. It had turned into obligation, into guilt, into something that no longer resembled the passionate connection they had once shared. "I don't know," he admitted, the words falling from his lips before he could stop them. "I don't know what love even means anymore." Sarah's eyes were wide with shock, and for a moment, John could see the anger flash across her face. She wanted him to choose. She wanted him to pick her, to choose their future over the past. And who could blame her? But John knew, deep down, that he couldn't make a decision like that on impulse. He couldn't rush this. "I can't give you that answer right now, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need time to figure this out. I need to understand what I really want, who I really am. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say anything, the door to the room creaked open again, and a nurse stepped inside. The nurse looked at the two of them with a quiet expression of concern. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the nurse said softly, her voice gentle. "But it's time for Mrs. Matthews to receive her next round of medication." John nodded absently, his mind still spinning. He could feel Sarah's eyes on him, but he didn't look at her. He couldn't. Not right now. Not with everything unraveling around him. The nurse moved closer to Lisa's bed, adjusting the IVs and administering the next dose of medication with practiced ease. John stood at the foot of the bed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Was it too late for redemption? Was it too late to undo the damage he had caused, to fix the mistakes he had made, to heal the wounds he had inflicted on Lisa? Was there a way to find peace in this chaos, or had he already crossed the point of no return? He didn't know. And that uncertainty gnawed at him, making every breath feel heavier, every second more unbearable. As the nurse finished and began to leave the room, she glanced back at him, her eyes soft. "She's comfortable," the nurse said quietly. "If you'd like to stay longer, we can arrange for a private room." John didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to feel anymore. Everything was slipping through his fingers, and all he could do was watch as his world crumbled before him. But in the midst of the uncertainty, one thing was clear: the choice was his. And he couldn't run from it any longer. The weight of the room pressed in on John, and with every beat of his heart, he felt himself sinking deeper into the quicksand of his own choices. He stared at Lisa, lying so still in the bed, the faint hum of the machine surrounding her the only sound. Her chest rose and fell slowly with each shallow breath, as fragile and fleeting as his own thoughts. The nurse had left moments ago, and the hospital room had grown quiet once again. The kind of silence that gnawed at you, making you acutely aware of every passing second, every unanswered question. John had told Sarah he needed time, but the truth was, he had no more time. He could feel the walls closing in around him, suffocating him with decisions he wasn't ready to make, yet knew he had no choice but to face. Sarah stood by the door, watching him. Her arms were folded across her chest, her eyes filled with something John couldn't quite decipher: concern, frustration, maybe even a bit of fear. She had always been patient with him, but today, that patience was beginning to fray. He had never seen her like this before, and it only added to the pressure he already felt. "John," Sarah's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "What are you going to do?" He turned to face her, but the look in his eyes was far from reassuring. He didn't have an answer for her. He wasn't sure he even had an answer for himself. "I don't know," he said, the words coming out more defeated than he intended. "I'm trying to figure it out. I need more time." Sarah shook her head slowly, her expression shifting from worry to something closer to disbelief. "You've had time, John. We've been over this. You've been thinking about it for months now, and here we are, still stuck in this place, waiting for some kind of miracle. But the truth is, there are no miracles, not for you, not for me, not for Lisa." Her words hit him like a slap to the face. He couldn't deny the truth of what she said. He had been avoiding this moment for far too long, hiding behind his indecision, his guilt, his fear. But there was no escaping it now. He had to face it. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he murmured, his voice tight with emotion. "I didn't want any of this." Sarah's eyes softened, but only slightly. She stepped closer to him, closing the space between them, but her gaze remained steady, unwavering. "You didn't want this, but you still chose it. You chose her. You chose to leave me in the dark, to stay with someone you no longer loved, someone who's dying while I stand here, asking for your future." John opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain? How could he make her understand? He couldn't undo what had been done. He couldn't erase the pain he had caused, the lies he had told. The truth was, he wasn't sure he loved anyone anymore, not Lisa, not Sarah, not even himself. The air seemed to grow heavier, as though the room itself was pressing down on him, suffocating him with the weight of his choices. He had put everything on hold for too long, allowing his confusion to control him. But it was all coming to a head now. The choices he had made were no longer abstract, they were real, palpable, and they had consequences. "I love you, Sarah," he said, the words raw and uncertain. "But I'm not sure I can leave her, not like this." Sarah's face tightened, and for a moment, John saw the frustration flash in her eyes. "And what about me, John? What about the promises you made to me?" Her voice trembled now, just a hint of vulnerability breaking through. "What am I supposed to do? Stand here and wait while you figure it all out?" John stepped toward her, but she took a step back, shaking her head. "No. I can't do that. I can't keep waiting for you to make up your mind. You need to decide." John's heart sank. He had hoped for more time, but there was no more time. There was only now. The harsh reality of the situation stood before him, and there was no easy way to navigate through it. No quick fix. No way to avoid the pain of his decisions. "I don't know how to choose," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I don't know how to walk away from her, not when she's like this. And I don't know how to walk away from you either." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Then, she spoke, her voice surprisingly calm, but with a quiet finality to it. "You don't have to choose, John. You don't have to choose between me and her. You just have to choose what kind of man you want to be. Do you want to be the man who runs away from everything, or do you want to be the man who faces the truth, no matter how hard it is?" John stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. What kind of man did he want to be? For so long, he had been running from the reality of his life, running from his responsibilities, running from his past. But now, there was no more running. The past had caught up with him, and the future was waiting, a future he couldn't move toward until he faced the mess he had made. "Sarah," his voice cracked as he said her name. "I don't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you." She nodded slowly, as if understanding more than he had expected her to. "I know. But you have to stop pretending that everything will work itself out. It won't. You have to make a decision. And when you do, you have to live with it." The finality of her words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. John felt his chest tighten as a sense of clarity slowly began to form, like a fog lifting from his mind. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose, a small ember of understanding flicker within him. But before he could respond, the door to the room opened again, and the nurse re-entered, her face marked with concern. She was holding a clipboard, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt again," the nurse said, her voice gentle but urgent. "But we're getting ready to move Mrs. Matthews to a different wing for more intensive care. Would you like to go with her?" John's heart skipped a beat. The moment had arrived. The inevitable was upon him, and now he had to make his choice. He looked at Sarah, who was watching him intently, her expression a mixture of expectation and sadness. Then, he turned back to Lisa. She had always been the woman he promised to cherish, to care for, to protect. But now, he had to decide if he could continue that promise or if it was time to finally let go. "I'll go with her," John said quietly, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. "I need to be with her. At least for now." Sarah's eyes filled with unshed tears, but she said nothing. She simply turned away, her shoulders slumped as she walked toward the door. John didn't stop her. He couldn't. As the nurse prepared to wheel Lisa's bed out of the room, John followed quietly behind her, his mind heavy with uncertainty. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he could rebuild the pieces of his shattered life. But as they moved down the sterile hallway, one thing was clear: the choice he had made was only the beginning of the journey he had to undertake. Lisa's breathing was shallow, but steady, as the nurse adjusted the equipment around her. John watched her for a moment, his heart aching with regret. Had he made the right decision? Or had he only delayed the inevitable? There was no turning back now. Only the future waited, and it was filled with questions John wasn't sure he was ready to answer. The sterile, dimly lit hallway seemed endless as John followed the nurse, his mind a blur of conflicting thoughts. He had agreed to accompany Lisa to the new wing of the hospital, but with each step, he found himself questioning his decision. Was he doing the right thing? Was this the final moment of reckoning? The door to the new unit loomed ahead, and the steady beep of a heart monitor in the background reminded him how fragile everything had become. The nurse pushed the bed forward, her movements precise and professional. John walked beside it, his steps slow and heavy, as if the weight of his emotions was dragging him down with every inch. He glanced at Lisa, her face pale, her body barely recognizable as the vibrant woman she once was. The woman who had been his partner, his wife, the one he had sworn to love and protect. But here she was, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for a life that seemed to slip further away with each passing day. And then there was Sarah. The woman who had come into his life like a whirlwind, offering him the excitement, the passion, the escape he had thought he needed. Now, with both women on opposite sides of his heart, he was torn between two worlds. A world of duty and obligation, and a world of desire and escape. The nurse pushed open the door to the new unit and entered, and John followed silently, feeling like a ghost in the background. The new room was quieter, more isolated, a place for more intense care. As Lisa was transferred to the new bed, John stood at the foot of the bed, unable to look away from her fragile form. "Is she?" John began, his voice faltering, but the nurse interrupted him. "She's stable for now," she said softly. "But her condition is still critical. We'll need to monitor her closely." John nodded absently, not sure whether he was relieved by her words or not. Stable? What did that even mean? Lisa was dying, slowly but surely. And here he was, standing at the edge of this abyss, unsure whether to take a step forward or step back into the life he had built with Sarah. The nurse glanced at him one last time before excusing herself, leaving John alone in the room with Lisa. The quiet hum of the machines and the soft rustle of the hospital linens were the only sounds that filled the space. It was as if the world had frozen around him, and he was suspended in time. He sat down in the chair beside Lisa's bed, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together. He looked at her face, trying to find some trace of the woman he had once loved. There was nothing left of her but the shell of a body, ravaged by disease. The woman who had once been his everything was now just a memory, a fading echo of what they had shared. His mind wandered back to the days when they had first met. Lisa had been so full of life, so vibrant and passionate. They had shared so many dreams together, so many plans. But somewhere along the way, those dreams had faded, and the plans had turned to dust. The love they had once shared had turned into something unrecognizable, something heavy and burdensome. And now, here he was, stuck in the ruins of that life, with no idea how to move forward. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers brushing against her cold skin. His heart ached at the sight of her, at the thought of the life they could have had if things had been different. But it was too late for regrets now. Too late for second chances. The door opened behind him, and John turned to see the nurse re-entering the room. She was holding a clipboard, her expression more serious than before. "We've just received a call from the hospital administration," the nurse said, her voice quiet. "There's a possibility we might need to move her again, depending on how her condition progresses. I'll keep you informed of any updates." John nodded, but the words felt like a distant echo in his mind. He barely registered what she said. All he could think about was the woman lying in front of him, her body so fragile, so broken. And then, the thought of Sarah crept back into his mind. How had it come to this? How had he allowed everything to fall apart so completely? The nurse left again, leaving him alone in the room with Lisa. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but it felt like a different world, one that no longer had any meaning for him. The life he had once dreamed of now seemed so far out of reach, as though it had never been real to begin with. He thought of Sarah, of her soft eyes and the way she had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She had been patient, understanding, everything he had needed in those early days. But now, everything was different. He had betrayed her trust, and there was no going back from that. What was he supposed to do? How was he supposed to fix this mess he had created? It wasn't just about Lisa or Sarah. It was about him. It was about his own redemption, his own understanding of who he was and what he wanted from life. And right now, he didn't have the answers. He didn't know what the right thing to do was. A soft knock on the door startled him, and he turned to see Sarah standing in the doorway. She had come, despite everything. Despite the hurt, despite the uncertainty. She was still here, still willing to fight for him, even though he had given her no reason to. "John," she said, her voice hesitant but strong. "Can we talk?" He looked at her, and for a moment, he felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had hurt her, betrayed her in ways that couldn't be undone. And yet, she was here, willing to talk to him, to try to understand him. "I don't know what to say, Sarah," he said quietly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." She walked into the room and closed the door behind her, her gaze falling on Lisa for a moment before meeting John's eyes. "I know you're struggling," she said softly. "But we can't keep pretending this is okay. You have to make a choice." John swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I don't want to choose. I don't want to leave her. But I don't want to lose you, either." Sarah stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "John, you're not going to lose me. But you need to stop running from this. You need to stop hiding behind your guilt, behind your fear. You need to be honest with yourself, with me, and with Lisa." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I don't know how to be honest with myself, Sarah. I've been lying to myself for so long. I don't know what's real anymore." Sarah's eyes softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek, her fingers warm against his skin. "I don't want to lose you, John. But I need you to choose to be here, with me. If you can't do that, then I can't stay. I need you to make a decision, for both of us." Her words pierced him like a knife, and he felt the weight of them settle deep in his chest. It was the ultimatum he had been dreading, but it was also the truth. He couldn't keep living in this limbo. He couldn't keep pretending that everything would work out. He had to make a choice, one way or another. John took a deep breath, looking at Lisa one last time before turning to face Sarah. The decision was before him, staring him in the face. He couldn't avoid it any longer. "I'll figure it out," he said finally, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but. "I promise you, I will. But right now, I need to be here for her." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She just nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. And then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving John alone again with his thoughts. As the door clicked shut behind her, John turned back to Lisa's still form. The decision had been made. But the weight of it hung over him like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. What would happen next? He didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the heavy burden of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: whatever happened, he would have to live with the consequences. The hours seemed to blur together in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. The soft beep of the machines, the rustle of linens, and the scent of antiseptic were all that accompanied John as he sat by Lisa's side. The weight of his decisions pressed on him with the intensity of 1,000 unsaid words, as if the walls of the room had grown too tight to contain the enormity of his own self-doubt. It had been a full day since Sarah left the room, her heart heavy with the ultimatum she had given him. The memory of her words echoed in his mind, "You need to choose, John. Choose to be here, or choose to let go." Those words had cut through him, slicing through the layers of guilt, indecision, and fear that had built up over the months. And now, with no more room for hesitation, he found himself face to face with the consequence of those words. He looked at Lisa, her face pale, her features so fragile now that it was hard to believe she had once been the vibrant woman who had captured his heart. She looked so different now, almost unrecognizable, her body a mere shadow of the woman she had been. Every breath she took seemed so distant, as though she were slowly fading from the world. And here he was, by her side, unable to answer the question that had been lingering in his mind since the moment he first met Sarah: who do I choose? The thought seemed so simple when it was just a question, but now that it was real, now that it was something he had to live with, the decision was anything but simple. He stood up and walked to the window, his eyes scanning the city outside, the lights blinking faintly in the distance. It was a world that felt foreign to him now, a world that didn't quite belong to him anymore. The life he had built, the dreams he had once shared with Lisa, now seemed like a distant memory. And the new life he had tried to build with Sarah was filled with questions, questions that only grew more complicated the longer he remained stuck in this hospital room, stuck between two worlds. The sound of footsteps behind him brought him out of his reverie, and he turned to see the nurse entering the room again. She was holding a chart, her face somber as she approached him. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her voice measured but gentle. "There's been a change in Mrs. Matthews' condition. We need to move her to the ICU." John's heart skipped a beat, the words hitting him harder than he had expected. He had known it was coming, had known that Lisa's time was running out, but hearing it out loud made the finality of it so much more real. His throat tightened as he struggled to find his voice. Is she okay?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. The nurse hesitated, her eyes flicking to Lisa's unconscious form before looking back at him. "She's deteriorating, Mr. Matthews. It's a matter of time now. We're doing everything we can to keep her stable, but," she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The room seemed to close in on him, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. The reality of the situation was crashing down on him, and he was drowning in it. How had it come to this? How had it come to the point where he was standing in a hospital room, holding the hand of a dying woman, knowing that he could never go back to the life they had once shared? He looked at Lisa again, her face serene in her unconscious state, and something inside him shifted. This is it. This is the end. The end of everything I knew. The end of everything we built together. The nurse gently placed a hand on his shoulder, pulling him out of his thoughts. "We need to move her now, Mr. Matthews. Would you like to accompany her?" John nodded numbly, his heart heavy in his chest. "Yes. I'll go with her." The ICU was a cold, clinical space, filled with the soft hum of machines and the occasional beep that marked the passing of time. Lisa was hooked up to an array of wires and tubes, the sterile environment a stark contrast to the life she had once lived. John stood by her side, his hand still clutching hers, as if holding on to the last thread of the life they had shared. But no matter how tightly he held her hand, no matter how much he willed it, nothing was going to bring her back. Her condition was worsening. The doctors and nurses had been in and out of the room, adjusting the machines, administering medication, but there was little more they could do. John could feel it in the air, the heaviness of inevitability. Lisa was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. And in that moment, the full weight of his choices came crashing down. He had been running for so long, hiding from the truth, avoiding the decisions that could change everything. But now, it was no longer about choosing between Sarah and Lisa. It was about facing the consequences of all the choices he had made up until now. The door to the ICU opened again, and John turned to see a familiar face enter the room. It was Sarah. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes searching the room before landing on him. Her expression was guarded, but there was a hint of something softer in her gaze, something that reminded him of the woman he had once known, the woman who had loved him without question. But that woman was no longer here. And he was no longer the man he had once been. "John," Sarah said softly, her voice almost lost in the sterile silence of the room. "How is she?" John couldn't bring himself to look at her. He was ashamed, guilt weighing on him with every passing second. "It's bad," he said quietly. "She's not going to make it." There was a long silence between them, and then Sarah spoke again, her voice softer now, tinged with sadness. "I'm sorry." John shook his head, finally meeting her eyes. "I'm the one who should be sorry, Sarah. I've hurt you. I've been selfish, and I've been lying to you. I don't know why you're still here, after everything I've put you through." Sarah's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Because I care about you, John. I care about you, and I want you to find peace. I want you to find a way to forgive yourself." John swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I don't think I can forgive myself, Sarah. Not for what I've done to you, not for what I've done to Lisa. I don't know how to make this right." She squeezed his arm gently, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to make everything right, John. You just have to face the truth. And you have to make the best of what's left." John felt his heart break at her words. He had spent so long running from the truth, pretending that everything would work out on its own. But the truth was staring him in the face now, and there was no escaping it. Lisa's breathing was shallow, and John looked at her one last time, his heart heavy with regret. "I've made so many mistakes, Sarah. And now it's too late for me to fix anything." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's never too late to do better, John. It's never too late to change." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long time, John felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. Maybe, even though he had made countless mistakes, he could still find a way forward. But first, he had to face what was happening in front of him. He had to let go of the past and accept the consequences of his actions. He turned back to Lisa, her face pale but peaceful. In that moment, he realized that he had already made his choice. He wasn't choosing between Sarah and Lisa anymore. He was choosing to be the man he needed to be, not for Sarah, not for Lisa, but for himself. With a final, heavy sigh, he reached down and kissed Lisa's forehead, whispering words that were meant for both of them. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm so sorry." And then, as he turned away, he took Sarah's hand in his, the weight of the past lifting just slightly from his shoulders. It wasn't over, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to move forward.